Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Saturday, the 15th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Forecasts, satellite, and radar links are available all at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can always give us a call at the weather info line at 800-472-0391 and find us on Facebook. We shared some information about the rain coming into south central Alaska today there. You can find us on Twitter, NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, or NWS Fairbanks, as well as NWS Alaska. And in the afternoon, you hear me say it all the time, but I'll say it again, you can always get your daily afternoon map briefing on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type in NWS Anchorage or AKwx, and you should be able to find very quickly our latest broadcast of the surface map charts that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So it's kind of about 2.5-minute long podcast, more or less, of what's going on around the entire state of Alaska, if you like the preview there. Here's fire danger, and we haven't really talked about fire danger a lot in the last couple of weeks because things are getting wetter, they're getting cooler, the humidity is staying a little bit higher in many locations, but that's not entirely true for all of the state, top to bottom, east to west. And we still have a few spots that are running a little bit on the drier side, some of those in the middle Tanana Valley and, the middle Yukon Valley and westward, and also around the Copper River Basin and around the eastern Alaska Ranges. These are the places that are not getting a whole lot of precipitation lately. The folks that are out and across the southwest, the Seward Peninsula and south central, and Kodiak Island, all these regions have seen at least a little bit of precipitation over the last several weeks, and some places have seen a lot more than that. These places really haven't, so we're still waiting for some of that to improve. As we look across the Bering Sea at this point, you'll see high pressure is slowly giving way now to the next wave of low pressure working across the central and western Aleutians. We've got another disturbance here across the central Pacific and another wave of moisture out across the western Pacific. Two typhoons, not just one, but two typhoons are seen just on the southern edge of this map here, and so we're not really getting the full scale of what's happening in the Pacific on this view. But one thing we are watching, like we were talking about yesterday, is what happens to that second typhoon. This is weeks away, but it looks like the first one starts to make a path into eastern Asia. The second one could recurve, as we seem to have happened pretty regularly in the late summer and early fall. It would not be unusual to see a surge of moisture come with that, but that again is several days, if not weeks, away from affecting anywhere close to Alaska. Something we're watching though. So the curious weather watchers there in your village, keep watch of that. Here's a look at what's going on across Alaska with the visible satellite pictures. So this is like sitting up on a satellite or the space shuttle if we had one and looking down and taking a snapshot here. We'll say the space station because we do have one of those. Looking down with the camera and taking pictures there. And you'll notice there's still plenty of clear, dry sky in some of those places that we have that higher fire danger across the middle Yukon Valley and the upper Yukon Valley for sure. Clouds sitting across the Brooks Range all the way up and down the west coast. Many areas seeing clouds and fog earlier today, but not southeastern Alaska. Once again, a beautiful day for you. This will probably be the last really nice day. It looks like the clouds are moving in tonight and tomorrow, and as we get into tomorrow, as you'll see on the forecast weather map here in just a little bit, there will be an increasing threat for rain. Now, some of that rain has been working its way into south central Alaska today. That wave, as we were talking about yesterday, marched right up Cook Inlet and started spreading rainfall all the way across the Kenai Mountains and the Chugach. But the good thing was, it turned out it did not have that subtropical moisture connection. So What does that mean? It means we didn't get that really big surge of heavier rainfall that we were a little concerned about during the midweek. So good news, we get the wetter weather that we need, and most of our areas around south central and southwestern Alaska can always stand at least a little bit of rainfall. And we didn't get any flooding or excessive rainfall concerns, so not too bad. This will continue working northward. We also have plenty of rainfall out across south and western Alaska. All of this working northward, and this huge plume of moisture working into the central and northern interior. With that comes an increasing risk for rainfall in more places north of the southern and western coasts. Now, today's weather map shows high pressure across the upper Yukon. That's what's holding that dry air in place for now. However, just a few days ago, this was centered out across the west. So things are on the move. The pattern is ungummed and a little more progressive than it has been. Low pressure just south of Kodiak Island at 1,013 millibars, responsible for drawing that moisture northward. Southeast sitting pretty with a mainly clear sky in many locations today. Low pressure across the southern Bering at 998 millibars, drawing in some drier weather. That circulation should fizzle out into more of a trough or a disturbed area of weather without a big temperature change, that is. And out across the central and western parts of Alaska, we'll see a much better chance for widely spread light rainfall. It probably won't be a big solid mass of rain working through. You're going to see some breaks working through, but all in all, for our map purposes here today, a fairly general area of light rain that is pretty extensive from the Seward Peninsula into the interior, into southwestern Alaska, south central, Prince William Sound, and even the northern Gulf Coast. Now take a look at this. Yakutat's right about here, and Juneau's here, and down around Craig, Klawock, and Ketchikan, and Annette. And you're still mostly in that drier part tonight. But as we get into Sunday, oh, there it is. You get back into a little bit of a wind shift, and here come your clouds tonight and the rainfall tomorrow. The best chance for at least some heavier rainfall, if there's going to be any, will probably start Sunday afternoon into Monday and focus across the northern coast of the Panhandle. The same usual places that get that same usual sogging, drenching rain, Yakutat to about Cross Sound, and maybe as far north as places like Sitka. So watch that outer coast there. If it starts to pick up a little bit, you'll say, yep, that's right, that's what he was talking about. Out across southwestern Alaska, there's still an opportunity for some light rain throughout the day. We've got a frontal boundary parked across the Brooks Range, and just east of, well, let's say north of Eagle and east of Arctic Village, we might even have just enough lift to get a shower or a thunderstorm going. Most of this is just going to be garden variety light rain, becoming more showery with time as we get into Sunday and Monday. The problem is it's probably just enough precipitation widespread in all the wrong places that's going to make the aviation and you're flying through some of these passes a little bit more difficult. Probably talking MBFR through a great number of places around Alaska for your Sunday. So things are going to be a little tricky there getting around if you're taking to the air. Now out across south and western Alaska, we still see that general flow coming in from the west and southwest, but just offshore we start to get some drier air moving into the mix. This high pressure out across the west is pushing eastward. And as it moves south of Kiska and Attu, by the end of Monday, 1,027 millibars of high pressure should make for more stratus and fog across the west and less rainfall. So that's gradually moving things along. For Monday, the greatest risk for heavier rainfall should be across the northern parts of southeast and out across the open water, maybe just grazing Kodiak Island on the southern side of this disturbance. For most places across the mainland, it's going to be showers. Plenty of clouds, some showers, and a gradual drying trend from west to east. Across the North Slope, we'll have high pressure working its way in across the Chukchi-Beaufort Seas, and with that comes a north and northeasterly flow that should lock in some low-level moisture. Hopefully not too bad for the visibility in the ceilings, but it doesn't look like a really great threat for precipitation. There might even be a few breaks there along the northern coast. High pressure across the Aleutians also means a general northerly flow, cooler weather, fog and stratus, but overall an end to some of the heavier precipitation. Now let's roll back the hands of time to earlier this afternoon at 3 o'clock. 60s and 70s were seen across southeast with plenty of sunshine today. A gorgeous day in Sitka, Juneau, Haines, and Skagway, and even Hyder made it up to 66. Looks like south central was back in the lower 60s for Valdez and Cordova. On the eastern side of a lot of that rain until earlier this afternoon. Mid-50s for most of the Kenai Peninsula. Anchorage was 57. Talkeetna just shy of 60 degrees. Got some rain there too. 72 in Fairbanks, 73 in Eagle, 64 for Fort Yukon. 30s and 40s for the North Slope. 36 degrees in Barrow, 41 around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Atkasuk was 40 degrees. Kotzebue was showing Temps closer to 59 with Kivalina at 53. Point Hope and Point Lay very close to 50 degrees today. 54 in Nome, Unalakleet 56, McGrath 55, Tanana had 69. Grayling and Lake Iliamna and many there across the south and west, and Sparivon saw temperatures in the mid to upper 50s at least today. Monarch was closer to the mid-50s, 56 in Bethel, 57 for Dillingham with 58 in King Salmon, Kodiak 57 degrees, low 50s for St. Paul and St. George. Sand Point was 63. Everywhere else on the Alaska Peninsula easily in the 50s today, 52 around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and low 50s for Shemya, Adak, and Atka by late afternoon. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay in the 40s and 50s for most of the lower terrain in the lower and middle Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys there, thanks to that warm and wet air spreading northward. Nome's only 50 tonight, 35 though, and drier and cooler for Barrow southeast, looking at temps in the low 50s. Prince William Sound and most of south central in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees, 52 in Kodiak, and closer to 50 degrees for most of the peninsula and the chain, with highs tomorrow warmest in the eastern interior. Along the Alcan border, temperatures could get pretty close to 70. Probably won't get all the way there. The North Slope in the 30s and 40s. The Seward Peninsula, including Nome and Kotzebue, looking at temperatures in the upper 50s there around Kotzebue Sound. A few places like Kivalina could touch 60 degrees as that warm air spreads northward. Southwest and Bristol Bay in the upper 50s. Kodiak looking close to 60. Most of South Central in the upper 50s and lower 60s, depending on exactly how much rainfall gets to you, but it will be cloudy. And upper 50s and low 60s for most of Southeast. St. Paul 54. IFR conditions are expected from the Beaufort Seacoast from Point Barrow and eastward. MVFR for the Chukchi Seacoast, Seward Peninsula, and Norton Sound. Look for IFR across most of the YK Delta into Bristol Bay. MVFR conditions increase across the southern parts of this panhandle, with northern parts of the panhandle, including Juneau, looking at mostly VFR conditions tomorrow. And you'll see some VFR around Prince William Sound, but watch for MVFR through a good chunk of Cook Inlet. Now again, we'll watch for some convection up north. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are expected to be VFR for at least a little while. Watch MVFR conditions to start, though, around Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we still expect MVFR conditions throughout most of your day. Same goes for Rainy Pass for your Sunday. Windy Pass, we expect to see a start out around VFR with worsening conditions. Isabel Pass, we expect to see VFR through most of your Sunday. Mentasta Pass looks to be visual flight rule with a chance for a few showers or storms in the region. Tanita Pass, probably looking at marginal conditions throughout most of your Sunday. Portage Pass will call MVFR through the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass, still one more opportunity for VFR flying there. Freezing levels show the levels dropping to about 6,000 feet across the North Slope, but that's actually up a little bit from yesterday as warmer air continues to work its way northward. But you can see pockets of cooler air out to the west, and very warm conditions continue across the Gulf of Alaska, with levels as high as 10 to 12,000 feet across the eastern Gulf and as low as about 8,000 feet very close to Yakutat and Icy Cape. Icing potential is increasing, but it's still pretty high up there. We did get a few reports across south central and southwest today of some mixed ice, and most of that was up around 9 to 10,000 feet, I believe. Out across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula to all the way down to Bristol Bay, you're going to have to go up above 8 to 9,000 feet to get into some light mixed or light rime, and also across the northern Gulf Coast above 10,000 feet. And there's a pocket of icing potential moving down toward the Pacific Northwest right now, but most of that will be moving away from southeast, so not a major concern. The jet stream shows our main storm path here. We've got a trough of low pressure across the Bering Sea and a ridge across the Gulf of Alaska with another faster moving conveyor belt of weather across the North Slope. That's around 60 knots. The faster winds moving over Bristol Bay tonight and tomorrow around 140 knots. That's what's pushing all that wet weather our way. South and westerly winds between 20 and 30 knots, stronger out over the open water, with south and westerlies coming into southeast Alaska between 30 and 35 knots. Winds are pretty light across the interior. We have a little bit more of a northwesterly push across the North Slope. That becomes even more north and northeasterly at 3,000 feet. Still pretty light around 10 knots, but just to the south of the Brooks Range, you see that south and westerly wind kicking in, again feeding in that low-level moisture, and south and westerly winds are coming into southeast Alaska thanks to high pressure here. For the central and western chain, winds are coming out from the northeast at 15 to 20 knots, and across the eastern chain in the Alaska Peninsula at around 20 knots. There, Kodiak Island also looking at a southwest flow at 20. Turbulence is pretty limited to the open waters of the Gulf right now, out across the YK Delta, south of Unalakleet, and then all the way out toward Cape Newenham and Bethel. Below 3,000 feet, you're probably going to run into some chop as low pressure is working inland, and 3,000 feet and below for central and western areas of the Aleutians, but it should be very hit and miss. Turbulence not the problem, visibility will be as we head through tomorrow. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Two parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Water. A drop can indicate coming rain. A mist can be refreshing. A river can power an entire community. The ocean can inspire awe in all of us. The forces of nature that create waves also create an inviting opportunity for wholesome entertainment. But on almost any beach in the country, the waves that come crashing ashore could also hide a dangerous and deadly force, the rip current. Few natural events are as powerful as rip currents. The rip current is the coming together of several different forces just a few feet from the beach. First, a sandbar appears offshore. Waves that would normally not break until hitting the beach instead break on the sandbar. The water from the waves is trapped by the sandbar and cannot move naturally back to sea. This creates water that funnels a fast-moving current away from shore. In that short time, anything or anybody caught in this flow of water can be pulled out in the current. That is where the danger comes in.
When a person gets caught in one, maybe they don't even know they're in one, but what's going to happen is they're going to find themselves getting further and further away from shore. If they find themselves in this situation, the first thing they need to do is not panic. That's the #1 rule, don't panic.
Even the strongest and most skilled swimmers can get caught in a rip current. Nationally, more than 100 deaths a year are attributed to rip currents. About 75% of all lifeguard rescues are rip current rescues. Swimmers can find themselves in a hopeless situation if they don't recognize the signs of a rip current and know how to escape its grasp.
The rip currents are fairly slow to form. It depends on the shoreline. Some areas they're very persistent in one place, and other areas they move around all the time. In most beaches, they're not dangerous or present most of the time. It's only under fairly brief periods of time where they really become a threat to people and swimmers.
By knowing the different forces that cause a rip current, you can tell with some certainty where one is flowing away from the beach. But even with that skill, it's always good to swim near a lifeguard station and check with the lifeguard to see if a rip current exists where you plan to swim. The first sign is the sandbar offshore, where you'll see breaking waves in a shallow area. If you see a sandbar, start searching for the other elements that make up a rip current. If one exists, you'll see water and sea foam moving through breakers and farther offshore. You'll then see different colored water beyond the surf. The water will actually highlight the narrow currents.
There are a lot of subtle indicators that a rip current is present and that it may be a threat. Some of those indicators are more turbid or dirtier water that shows up with farther outside the surf zone particularly. You see it out beyond the breakers, and that's a good indicator that there may be a rip current present.
Rip currents can occur anywhere along the shoreline. Swimmers should be especially cautious around jetties or piers. But there is one warning sign that will leave you with no doubt. When you see warning flags, which can differ in look and style from beach to beach, it means one thing: don't swim. The rip current can kill.
The red flags are there for your safety. Each morning, each one of the beach patrol services on the Outer Banks has a supervisor who gets up and checks the water conditions. If we feel like the water conditions are such that are a danger to your personal safety, we put the red flags up.
Ultimately, there may be a time when you become caught in the rip current. If you're caught in a rip current, The one key rule to remember is to not swim against it. Swim parallel to the shore. You'll either swim out of the current or swim until the current itself dissipates.
A lot of people think that when they're in a rip current, they can't get back to shore, and that scares them. And they think that they can't get back to shore where they are and also all up and down the beach, and that's not true. It's just maybe 50 yards wide where the rip current is. If you swim parallel 50 yards one way or the other with the beach, it doesn't matter, then it's a lot easier to swim back to shore.
Most rip currents dissipate after about 50 to 75 yards. Then you can swim parallel to the shore. Do not hesitate to wave to get help. Drop by drop, the ocean's water is enjoyable, powerful, and at times can be dangerous. The beaches of the Atlantic are some of the most beautiful in the country and provide enough physical challenges and pure fun to enjoy without risking your life by swimming in a rip current. Study the facts and be careful. Parents should make themselves aware of the conditions of the water before letting their children swim. And when children are swimming, parents should keep a sharp eye on them all the time. We want you to enjoy your time in the waters of the Atlantic. But before you do, check the conditions. Make sure no rip current or any other dangerous conditions exist by checking with the lifeguard.
I think the best thing that people can do is always find out where the lifeguard stand is, swim in front of the lifeguard stand, and when you get onto the beach, before you get in the water, walk up to the lifeguard, ask them, are there any problems with the water that day?
When you come down on vacation, you just really need to be smart about the ocean. Speak to your lifeguard, and by understanding is your best defense against this ocean, and understanding can be talking to that lifeguard.
Swim with a buddy, swim in your ability, and don't take chances. We want everybody to come down and have a good time and leave safe.
It's an easy thing to do, and when you are sure the water is safe, the ocean will be yours to cool off in and enjoy for years to come.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge and drawn in the wind directions here for what we can expect tomorrow. North and northeasterly winds cutting across Point Barrow, and we get more of an east to westerly flow coming across the Beaufort seacoast there. So that's going to affect the drift of the ice a little bit. However, we still have a lot of warm air moving northward, and as that happens, that's going to erode that leading edge of ice. We're still watching for that opening, and you see that some of that ice has actually dropped a little bit further south between Kaktovik and Prudhoe Bay, according to our latest analysis from our sea ice experts at the National Weather Service there. You can always check this map out, as well as more detailed information about thickness and the drift and the forecast over the next 5 days at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at the map now for southeast. South and easterly winds remain light across the central and southern inner coastal waterways, and southerly flow comes up the outer coast, 15 to 20 knots with about 4-foot seas in all areas. By Monday, though, we get that south and westerly shift, and with that comes a better chance of rain. Look for winds to come up in the Lynn Canal and on the outer coast to 25 knots, 5-foot seas around the Lynn Canal, 8 to 9-foot seas on the outer coast around the Clarence Strait, southwesterlies at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Across south central, a light and variable flow in northern parts of Cook Inlet, otherwise an east and southeast wind around 10 to 15 knots over the Barrens and outside of Resurrection Bay. East to westerly winds are moving across the northern Gulf at about 15 to 20 knots. We'll see southeasterlies up to 15 with a 3-foot sea inside of Prince William Sound. For Monday, southwesterlies are developing on either side of Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait, that's about 10 knots with the 3-foot sea. 11-foot seas on the eastern side with 25 knots there. And winds are still pretty light across the north and western sections of the Gulf. The 20-knot winds, though, are expected just outside of Prince William Sound with a 7-foot sea. Southeasterlies come down to 10 knots inside of Prince William Sound for Monday. On the Alaska Peninsula and on the Bering Sea coast, look for a south and southwesterly flow up to 15 knots with 10 to 15 knot winds on the Pacific coast with 6 to 7 foot seas there. As we get into Monday, you'll see more of a west and southwesterly flow along the Bering Sea coast with 4 to 5 foot seas. And notice those westerlies in the Pacific coast are up to 25 knots now with 10 to 11 foot seas, a little bit higher as you get up toward Castle Cape and east of Chignik there with a westerly flow coming off the peninsula. For the Aleutians, a northwesterly flow across Kiska and Attu, 20 knots with a 7 foot sea. South and westerly winds will be the predominant direction for the central and eastern chain with 20 knot winds there. 5 to 6 foot seas in the Bering Sea coast and 7 to 8 foot seas across the Pacific coast. Again, all at 20 knots on Sunday. And then winds diminish in all areas as we get into Monday with a north and northwesterly flow on the Bering Sea coast side. Once you get into the Pacific, that turns even more to more of a northeasterly direction, 15 knots with 6 to 9 foot seas. Seas coming down across the central and western chain out to Kiska and then back up around Shemya at 7 feet with more of a variable flow throughout the day. Northeasterlies around Kiska at 15. The west coast shows the changes there as well. Northeasterly winds on the western side of the trough. For St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew, you're looking at 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. But here's the warmer side, 15 to 20 knots with 5 foot seas outside of the Kuskokwim Delta. And then westerlies come back in on Monday, 15 knots there, 15 to 20 knots north of Nunivak Island. And around the Pribilofs, a 20 knot wind with a 5 foot sea as we start up the week there, again with that northwest flow. Here's Sunday's marine forecast for the north and northeasterly winds coming ashore there around the Beaufort Sea coast. 3 foot seas in the east, and then we get to 6 to 7 foot seas across the Chukchi Sea with east and northeasterly winds, 25 to 35 knots. Not quite small crafts there. 20 knot wind there coming across the Beaufort Sea coast with east and northeasterly winds for Monday, and east and northeasterlies also holding at around 30 knots there for the Chukchi Sea coast. 20 knots from the north just outside of Kotzebue Sound with a 6 foot sea on Monday. Recapping tonight's weather, it looks like rain is on the order for most of the west coast of Alaska and moving into the interior. A better chance of showers north and occasional light rain for most of south central and clouds moving into southeastern Alaska. Look for an increasing threat for rainfall across the outer coast on Sunday and especially in the north and eastern Gulf. A chance for an isolated shower or storm across the northern Alcan border east of Arctic Village and north of Eagle. Showers will become a little more likely in the west as the main threat for rain starts to wind down from west to east, and another surge of rainfall is moving into the north and eastern Gulf as we head into Monday. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.